Okay. All right. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight to the Sustainable Water Network's River Series. The Sustainable Water Network is a loose organization of about 30 different groups and individuals that came together over our concern for the diminishing flows in our rivers, streams, and springs. We're involved with education, with outreach, and with water law reforms for better protection for our rivers. So we started this river series to spotlight the remaining perennial rivers in Arizona, using local expertise and advocates who are very familiar with these rivers to help us better understand some of the issues they're facing and maybe find ways that, that we can help. So tonight we are very grateful to have Gina Mason with us. And the title to her presentation is the Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian Community Way of Life Protectors. But before I turn it over to her, I just want to say a few words about Gina. So Gina is a biologist working for the Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian Community's Environmental Protection and Natural Resources Division. And she's been there for over 16 years. She currently supervises several environmental programs, including the Water Quality Program, Air Quality Program, Brownfields Program, and the Compliance and Wildlife Management Program. She earned 2 degrees from Arizona State University, a BS in biology, and an MS in environmental management. So welcome, Gina, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us tonight.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Kristen, and thank you all for having me here this evening. Before I start, I just wanted to make sure that I introduce 2 of our staffers from the Water Quality Program that are on the line, Baltazar Solis and Serena Cooper, and they are also community members. So if you do have questions for them and you want to get more of a tribal perspective, at the end of the presentation, feel free to ask them some questions. And I guess we'll dive on in. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, we're ready to go. Okay. All right. Not moving. Okay, let me go back out and try again. Okay, and you can see my screen?
Got it.
Okay. Okay, so now you're looking at a map of Arizona that shows all the Native American reservations within it. So right smack dab, almost in the middle, is where the Salt River Pima-Maricopa Indian Community sits. You can see the little blue with the circular black outline. So the community is about 53,000 acres. So it's pretty small in comparison with a lot of the other reservations, but we are very fortunate in where we sit. So it is a gift and a curse, I'll say. So fortunate in that we're able to have a lot of economic development because of where the community sits, but it's a curse also because of where we sit. A lot of the community members end up losing some of their cultural identity because they are so close to the municipalities, and we have a lot of encroachment coming in from Mesa and Tempe, Gilbert. Okay, so here is a map of the community, and so you can see how the other entities border the community. So we sit right on the border of Scottsdale, Mesa, Tempe, and Fountain Hills. So on the right to our east, we also have the Tonto National Forest. So we have the Forest Service land there. This screen shows our land use map. So we currently have about 13,000 acres set aside for cultivated land. The community grows melons, there's cotton, corn, so just a multitude of different cash crops. We also have about 19,000 acres of preserved land that's been set aside. Within those acres of preserved land, we have our rivers. So both the Verde and the Salt River run through the community boundaries. So here you can see the pointer. We have about 2 miles of flowing Verde River along the northeastern boundary. There's about 4 miles of the Salt River that's flowing through the community boundaries, and then another 12 miles of the Salt River that is dry. However, although the Salt River is dry for the majority of the portion running through the boundary, we do still take lots of measures to protect the dry Salt River. So a little bit about the people. The current population is just over 9,500 enrolled members in the tribe. There's about 7,500 members that actually reside within tribal boundaries, and the rest are outside of the tribal boundaries. There are actually 2 tribes into one. So there are the Pima, which are also called the Optum, and the Papash, which are known as the Maricopas, and they reside in 2 districts. The Lehigh district is mostly designated for the Maricopa and the Salt River for the Pima. However, they are able to live in either district if they like. It's just that this is where you'll find the majority of each of the tribes. And they do have 2 distinct cultures and 2 very distinct languages. Just a little bit about the past and how they came to be. So both of these tribes lived along the Salt and the Gila rivers. The Pimas were majority along the Salt River, and the Maricopas, they lived mostly along the Gila rivers and the Colorado. Both of these tribes were farming people. So they lived along the rivers. This was their way of life. So they used hand dug canals to irrigate their crops. They did end up becoming allies. So the Maricopas, they sought refuge from other tribes. So they were looking for protection from the Yuma, from the Apaches. And so they came across the Pimas and they asked for assistance. And from there, they did become allies. So why is riparian area protection and restoration so important to the tribe? So I did just say that this was their way of life. This is their home. This is where they lived along these rivers. They thrived along these rivers. They used these rivers for their cultural practices. They use these rivers for food. And unfortunately, we only have about 10% of our original riparian areas remaining in the state of Arizona. So this is something that we need to continue to protect. So I'm very happy that this network does exist, because the more protectors we have, the better. So we are working hard to try to protect our portion of the riparian areas within the tribe. So another reason why the tribe finds it so important to protect these rivers. So not only for the water quality of the wetlands and for the rivers, so that they can use these rivers for their cultural practices and just to enjoy, but also for the wildlife that also use these rivers. Most importantly, the bald eagles. The tribe actually has 3 pairs of nesting bald eagles along the riparian corridor currently. The tribe has a very unique tie to the bald eagle. They do look at the bald eagle as somewhat of a cousin. And so it is very important for us to protect this avian species. So the Environmental Protection and Natural Resources Division, this is the part of the tribe that has been given the stick to actually protect a lot of the archaeological resources and the natural resources within the tribal boundaries. Within the Environmental Protection and Natural Resources Division, we have several programs. So there's CARP, which is the Community Action Revitalization Program. We have our Archaeology and NEPA program, Waste Management, Brownfields, Range Management, and Noxious Weeds Management. And those are lumped into what we call land stewardship. Under our environmental stewardship, we have air quality, pesticides and hazardous substances, compliance and wildlife management, and water quality. So we are kind of a one-stop shop when it comes to environmental. Within EPNR, we have about 23 staff members to run all of these programs. The water quality program. So this is the program that's actually responsible for monitoring, protecting these rivers. So we protect the Verde River and the Salt River through various ways. And the way that we're doing this is through water quality testing, stream protection and restoration projects and outreach. And I will get into each one of these components individually. So water quality sampling. We perform biannual sampling along both the Verde and the Salt River. So we sample twice a year for a full set of parameters, which means we're looking at metals, we're looking at different ions, and we do summer bacteria sampling 5 times a year between the months of May to September. The reason why we're doing bacteria sampling is because in the summer months, bacteria tends to be much higher due to not only recreation, but due to the heat. And a lot of people are going out to the river. So we're trying to make sure that it's safe for these people to enjoy. There have been times that we've found high hits of bacteria, and we've had to put out notices telling people that it's not safe for them to actually recreate at the time. And then we also do macroinvertebrate sampling, and we're doing this once per year, and we're looking for benthic macroinvertebrates. So you can see in the picture, we have one picture of us doing the benthic macroinvertebrate sampling training. It's the picture at the top right, and then the picture on the bottom, this is us along the Salt River. We have our tagline out and our equipment, and we're actually collecting water samples in the summer. Some of the parameters that we're looking for, pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, electrical conductivity, turbidity. So these are our in situ parameters. We do this, and you can see the picture on the bottom. This is us collecting these in situ, the in situ data. We'll just do it right in the field. And then we're also looking for flow, nutrients, bacteria, pesticides, and metals. So we do have a lab that we work with, and we will, as we collect these samples in bottles, and you can see some of the bottles we're putting in coolers, the picture on the top on the right, and we'll send these samples off to the lab and get the analysis back within about 2 weeks. So now looking at some of the projects that we've done. So our erosion mitigation and restoration. So the Riverine Erosion Area Mitigation Project, this is our newest project. We were recently awarded a competitive grant from the EPA to address a large arroyo that have formed within the riparian corridor. This project also addressed some smaller projects, river bends, and looking at keeping some of the pollution away from some of the banks. But just to focus on the arroyo was about 170 feet in length, 25 feet in width, and about 10 feet deep. So it had grown quite large over time. So we're looking at probably a span of about 8 years' time. The picture on the left, where you can see the yellow circle. So this shows an aerial view of just the arroyo. So this area used to be actually crossable by vehicular traffic. So it was a popular path for community members to take in order to get to the river. But due to its size, that was no longer passable. Rains continued to incise this arroyo. Sediments continue to go into the Salt River, which we know that sediment loading into the river can cause fish kills. So we definitely wanted to address this as soon as possible. So we applied for the grant, we were awarded it, and I'm happy to say that we have finished this project. One of the things we did in the beginning of the project is we completed check dams upstream of the arroyo. So this is the picture that you see. One of the staff members on the call, Baltazar Solis, he's actually the one that facilitated the check dams. So here we're showing the arroyo as it's being constructed. So the mitigation efforts in place. So we have the large river rock that's been put down. And in the back of the picture, you can see the erosion control mat. So there's an erosion control mat that's put along the entirety of the arroyo. And here's a larger shot. And this is looking to the north. So one thing you'll notice, the large boulders that we placed here. We put those boulders to keep from having people drive through the arroyo since it's been fixed. So we don't want to have a similar issue that we had in the past. So our revegetation efforts, the first thing that we did is we got some advice from the Scottsdale Community College as well as our Cultural Research Department on what native plants we should be planting in this area. So we wanted to look at not only the diversity of the plants that were already there, but we also wanted to plant something that might be culturally significant for community members to use. We collaborated with the SCC to grow the plants. If you're not aware, SCC has a very large nursery and they often grow plants for us. And so they grew about 300 to 400 plants for us to use for this project. Then we worked alongside SCC as well as students from the SRPMIC Accelerated Learning Academy. And this is a alternative high school that's within the tribe, and it has kids from about 16 to 21 years old. And they came out and helped us plant, and we planted over several days. We had several community members come out, as well as students from SCC and ALA. And we were able to get all these plants in the ground. We had about 60 tall pots. If you've ever planted a tall pot, it's not easy. So it took a lot of work. So we had about 60 tall pots and about 200 to 300 1 to 5 gallon plants that we put in. So now that we not only restore this area and make it beautiful, we also have now created a space that's accessible for community members to get to where they can actually come and harvest some of the materials that they might need. So you can see in the picture in the middle, you'll see that there's the data sheet that's on the bottom page. So one thing that we did is we wanted these students to collect data for us. So we're trying to monitor the plant growth. So we're doing this in collaboration with SCC. We're going to monitor the plant growth over time. And so the students helped us take some baseline data, and then we want community members to assist us with monitoring that plant growth. So one thing that we did is we installed photo points. There are 5 photo points surrounding the project area. So the picture on the right, you'll see one of the photo points that's highlighted in yellow. In the picture on the left, you'll see a sign. We did create a QR code. This QR code actually takes you to a video to show community members how to actually correctly take pictures at the photo point. So it asks them, please help us to watch these plants. Can you please take photos? And then they just upload the photos from there so that we can have them for future reference. So another study that we did, we decided we were going to do a fish tissue study. The reason why we did a fish tissue study is because we got a question from council. Council wanted to know, is the fish safe to eat? Okay, well, that wasn't something that we could just answer at the time. So what we did is we sat down, we determined a process for how we wanted to conduct this study. We spoke to the Cultural Resource Department to ask them, what are the main fishing holes of community members? Where are they actually harvesting these fish? So we came up with 4 sites, the beach, the wall, and pond 1 and pond 2. One of these sites is along the Verde, 3 of them are along the Salt River. Next, we had to determine also what species are we looking for? So we also asked Cultural Resources, what species of fish are community members mostly harvesting from the river? And so we came up with this list: channel catfish, grass carp, largemouth bass, rainbow trout, sunfish, and bluegill. So this is the process that we used. So after we collected the fish from the rivers, we had to weigh them. The fish were measured, and you can see in the picture at the bottom, we have our ruler. They had to be inspected. So we were looking for any types of lesions or anything that didn't look normal. So we wanted to collect that data also to put into our report. All the fish were photographed for documentation purposes. And then to prepare them for shipping, we had to remove all the scales, and then we would fillet each sample. So there would be one sample that had skin and then one with no skin. And then we would ship these off to the lab. So these were the toxins that we were looking for. So we wanted to see if these toxins were bioaccumulating in the tissue of the fish. And so you can see some of the results here. So the DDT derivatives, methylmercury was found, compounds of dioxins and furans were found in the fish. Arsenic was one that we found a lot in the fish tissue. So if we do decide to do this study in the future, one thing that we're going to do to cut down on costs, because this was about a $40,000 study, is we would take off a good majority of these toxins and just use the toxins that are most important based on the data that we initially obtained. So here's a little bit more on the results. So there were some amounts of methylmercury found in channel cat and largemouth bass, but not as much as was found in a study conducted by the state of Arizona that did a similar study at Roosevelt Lake. So that was a positive. One thing that we did find that the larger, older fish had larger toxins that have bioaccumulated than the smaller, younger fish. We also found that within fish species, those samples that had the skin intact had a larger amount of the human toxins also. So just knowing a little bit about biology, those fatty fish, lots of lipid layers, you're going to have a lot of those biotoxins accumulating there. So we did prepare a report for the community and also a fish consumption advisory. Fish consumption advisory was based upon weight. And so from here, looking at what we obtained, we were able to tell community members how many fish of each species you should try to consume, your maximum amount you should consume within a month's time. And so that's what we came up with. So another thing that we've done in the past, river cleanups. So our river rafting cleanup project is something that we started based upon a desire from our youth council. So not only do we have a community council, there is a youth council, and they approached us. They said that they wanted to do a worthwhile project to help their community. And so we, after discussion, we chose to do a cleanup along the Salt River. So the water quality program staff, after doing assessments, going down the river, we'd seen lots of trash in the river corridor. Sometimes it just looked like a floating landfill, and you can see from those pictures on the bottom. People that have been in the valley for years, you've probably tubed down the Salt River, or you know of people that have tubed down the Salt River. And this is something that brings hundreds of people to the Salt River area every year in the summer. And unfortunately, people leave behind flip-flops and water bottles and beer bottles. And we found diapers floating around in the river. So as disheartening as this was, we decided we could actually make a difference here. So we did some coordination with our environmental staff. We coordinated with the community council to get permission to do this project. Of course, we had to convince parents that we were going to be safe. We enlisted the help from the fire department just for safety reasons. We had to get all the equipment that we might need. And luckily, we were very successful. So we found that we ended up doing this annually with the youth council. So we ran this for 7 years. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we haven't been able to do it in the last 2 years. So we're hoping that we'll be able to do it again in this summer. And like I said, we've had great results, and you'll see in forthcoming photos. So these are just points showing you where we start and where we end. So we start the first spot along the Verde River, and we float downstream. So we stop right about where the Salt River meets the Verde, and then we go further downstream, and we'll end up getting out at the salt. So we're traveling quite a few miles and collecting trash along the way. So some photos. So in the beginning, we tried John boats. We found those to be a little heavy. We then tried canoes. The canoes worked pretty well, but depending on how familiar you are with watercrafts and your comfortability with them, we had a lot of kids that were capsizing the boats. So we tried tubes. Tubes work well, but they're really slow. A little bit hard to steer in a direction that you want to go. We ended up back with canoes. So we found origami canoes. If you're not familiar with these are foldable canoes that you can purchase. I'm not a spokesperson, but I'll tell you they're fantastic. So you fold them up into a square and you can carry it in a little case. To give you some perspective, I'm 5'3", 116 pounds, and I can carry this canoe by myself. So they're great. So one thing that we found over years of trying different watercraft is we just kind of did a hodgepodge and would mix them together, and we would figure out who has experience with canoes, if you're more comfortable with the raft, and then we would just have a plethora of watercraft on the river at one time. So this is our first stop. So when we'll travel downstream and we'll stop to take a quick break, let the kids catch their breath, and then they can actually collect any trash that might be along this bank of the salt. And this is just some of the trash that the kids picked up as they were traveling downstream. This is an ending picture along the Salt River. So you can see all the bags of trash that were collected there. And here's a picture from another year and from another. So if you look at all the trash collected over 7 years, we've got several tons of trash that would have just been accumulating within the Salt River channel. So we were giving ourselves a lot of applause. So another project that we've done, solar powered wells. The reason why we decided to do this is for non-point source river protection. So we do have a lot of cattle and wild horses that graze within the river corridor, and like all animals, they will defecate along the banks. Cattle will defecate in the river. Sometimes when we have flood events, a lot of that feces gets washed right into the river channel. So one thing that we were trying to mitigate is we were trying to keep some of the wildlife away from the riverbanks. And so we got some funding from EPA, and we put in a couple of solar powered wells along the Verde and the Salt. So with the picture on the right, you can see a wellhead that's sticking out. Connected to the wellhead, about a couple of 100 feet is actually a hidden solar panel. And then another couple of 100 feet, there is a stock tank that's also attached. So it has a float that's connected to it. So once the water gets down to a certain level, the well should just pump water back into the stock tank for wildlife to use. So we've had a really good noxious weed removal and revegetation program over the years. So the major noxious weed that we've been hitting is salt cedar. Most of you probably are very much aware of salt cedar because it's all over the Southwest. It's an invasive woody species. It grows big and in thick stands. It was originally planted here for erosion control. It's from Eurasia. The problem with salt cedar is that it drops about 500,000 seeds a year, and it exudes salt from its leaves, which then it keeps other native plants that we need to grow from growing. And it's really threatened our riparian areas for many years. It's drought tolerant, it's flood tolerant, and it's hard to get rid of. We have enlisted a multitude of sources over the years to tackle this problem. One thing we made sure we did is that we start upstream so that we don't have seeds being hydro-carried downstream. We would use the cut stump method and also heavy machinery. Cut stump method, if you're not familiar with it, is probably the best way to do it. However, it's much harder. You can only tackle small areas at a time. So when you're using the cut stump method, it's boots on the ground. You'll have someone that will make a cut close to the ground, and then within about an hour, someone needs to come through and actually spray that stump, because salt cedar will form a seal. It'll form a protective seal once it's cut after so long, and then it will just resprout. So your spray will not affect it. So this picture actually shows an area where we use the cut stump method along the Salt River. Within the few years that we've done it, we've hit about 35 to 40 acres that we've cleared. Most of this has been boots on the ground, and we found that we've had a lot of success in it. So here's some pictures. You can see the top left picture. This is someone that's actually doing some cutting. So he's trying to cut. We'll use hand saws, we'll use chainsaws. The picture on the right is we had heavy machinery. We cleared about 15 acres during that time. So here's the problem with using heavy machinery. Yes, you get a large area done at one time, but when you come through and you spray, you're not going to hit everything. So you do have to come back several times and do it over and over again. So it does take up some time. So you do have to be patient, I think, with that particular method. So one thing that we make sure we do is when we clear the salt cedar, we try to revegetate the area using natives and hope that they'll grow and spread and keep the salt cedar from coming back. So we, like I said before, we work with SEC, their plant nursery, and they'll grow hundreds of plants for us at a time, typically native mesquites. And we love free labor. So one thing that we've done in the past is we'll have large scale events. So I will say free, they're free to our group. However, this particular event that I'm showing is called Fall Overhaul. So the tribe has a large scale event every year called Fall Overhaul. It's for tribal employees. So once a year in October, we have thousands of employees that get deployed to various areas within the community to do beautification and restoration projects. So yes, we are getting paid for the day to do these projects. It's great for the people that don't usually get out in the field to get out. But for us, we love it because we get
I make beans, and they're hot right now.
We get a lot of people to come out.
Yeah, but they're best fresh.
At one time to
They're
actually
just gonna make
do this
pesto
work.
salad. I guess they would just wait. Or I can make it and put in the refrigerator.
Hi, all. This is Linda. Can you please mute? We're listening to Gina right now. Please, everyone, make sure your mute is on. Thank you.
Oops, I was trying to mute and I muted you, Gina. Go ahead and unmute yourself. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I love the virtual world. This is fun. Okay. All right. Okay, so another species that we've tackled is arundo. If you're not familiar with the name arundo, you might be familiar with it being known as giant reed. If you've been to the Salt River, I'm sure you've seen it. It's a herbaceous plant that's all along the banks. It also was brought here for erosion control around the 1800s. Like salt cedar, it's tough to eradicate. It's drought tolerant, it's flood tolerant. It has a complex rhizomal system, root system. So it's hard to just yank out of the ground. So we've had to be careful with this one. One problem that we've had is that due to the fact that it is a hydrophyte, and so it's right along the banks and in the water, it is difficult to get to sometimes. Being that I'm only 5'3", I can only stand in so many feet of water. So a lot of the times we're needing to find areas that we can actually wade in to get to the arundo so that we can eradicate it. So this picture is in an area along the Salt River. So the arrow on the left is pointing to some arundo that we just hand sprayed. So one thing that we like to do is we like to do experiments. So we decided we were going to do an experiment and see which might work better. If we spray the arundo versus doing a cut stump method. So the arrow on the left shows just a spray only. The arrow on the right shows the arundo that we actually cut out and sprayed. Both systems killed the arundo, but as you can see, the spray, it just leaves it in place. So that was the issue with the just the spray only method. These are a couple of pictures. So I've got Baltazar Solis on the left, and he's actually doing some of the cutting, and he's taking the arundo out. The picture on the right is Serena Cooper. She's actually certified in pesticides, so she's actually doing the spraying on the right. So the constructed treatment wetlands, we have several of these within the community. We have one in each district, so one in Lehigh and one in the Salt River district. So we were discussing putting in constructed treatment wetlands. We had to look at where the outfalls were to the Salt River. These products are put in place to protect the Salt River. And as I mentioned early in my presentation, although we have many miles of dry Salt River, the salt riverbed is still something that we want to protect. So the EPA was able to give us funding to complete these projects. Both of these constructive treatment wetlands that I'm going to talk about were in channels, like earthen channels. They had lots of solid waste because people were using them for dumping grounds. So there were refrigerators and old stoves and concrete pieces, lots of salt cedar in place, and they were obviously contributing non-point source to the river. So this is just a schematic of what the Cottonwood wetland looks like. So this is the wetland that's within the Salt River District. It's actually the first of the two wetlands. This wetland was put in 2003. And you can see it's got a nice trail system around it. So we use it a lot for education and outreach purposes. And it's served its purpose very well over the years. It's very, very good at sediment catching. So we've trapped tons of sediment over the years. We do have 2 sediment gauges within this wetland, so we can actually collect sediment data. So this is it in the beginning. So the picture at the top right, you can see that there are sparse plants coming in, and there's a large cottonwood tree in the background. This is how the Cottonwood wetland got its name, because there were a couple of very large cottonwoods that were growing in this area. They stabilized the channel. You can see on the left, this is the outlet, so where all the water is going out before it highlights and goes into the Salt River. We planted some hydrophytes. We planted terrestrial plants along the outskirts. We took out about 1/2 acre to 1 acre of salt cedar and replanted with coyote, willow, and cottonwood. So here's a picture of the pole plantings. The majority of the wetlands were pole planted. So the picture on the left, you'll see a bunch of poles put into the ground, and then just a few months later, they're sprouting. So just a few before and afters. You can see the picture at the top on the left. You can see some remnants of solid waste, and you couldn't get around very well. And the picture on the right shows a really nice trail system, so community members can enjoy it. People use it for exercise, bird watching purposes. So it's been really great. The picture on the left bottom, so this is the outlet before, and then the after, this is the outlet. So now we have a display case where we can put information for community members that might come and visit. We have an outdoor classroom, so there's seating that will have kids sit there, and we can go over different activities for the day with them. Then the second, the constructed treatment wetlands, this one is in Lehigh. This is called the Lehigh wetland. So this is a schematic of what the Lehigh wetland looks like. So it's got 3 bays. So there's the forebay of where the water comes in, and then the middle, and then the outlet, which before it goes into the Salt River. And I said we like experiments, so we use this wetland as an experimental wetland. And the reason why I say that is because we decided we were going to hydro seed and lay stabilization mats down only on the first half of the wetland, because we want to see how long it would take for those seeds to be wind dispersed or water dispersed, or even dispersed by wildlife, and how long it would take for the second half of the wetland to actually start to grow. So that was really fun to watch. And in no time, the latter half of the wetland was catching up to the first half. One of the ways that we planted this wetland, so we did do some pole planting, cottonwoods and willows, but a lot of the plants that we put in here got put in free labor Earth Day. So Earth Day is the second of our large scale events that we have. So we have a large scale event every April around the National Earth Day, or the Global Earth Day, excuse me. So around the 22nd of April each year. And so we would often have large groups of people coming out to this wetland and planting. So here's just a little bit before. So the picture on the top left, this is what the wetland looked like in its early years. And this is more what the picture on the right is more what it looks like today. So you can't even see across because the trees are so high. The picture on the bottom is just another picture of the wetland. So it's got signage all around. So there are signs that, you know, talk about the wetland and talk about like the plants. It talks about the wildlife there. So people can go and enjoy the wetland even if we're not there with them. One of the major things that we like to do is outreach. So we pride ourselves in providing quality environmental education outreach to the community, to all ages of the community. And so we do it often. So whether we're doing providing outreach at our wetlands, or in the classroom, you see we're doing a water quality experiment with the high school, or at the rivers. Got kids looking at macroinvertebrates, some students doing some water quality testing, and then we took high school students on a rafting trip to look at sediments and salinity. We also like to do a lot of materials development for the community. So we also do a lot of newspaper articles. We have developed 2 booklets so far. Both of the booklets, we've taken artwork from students from the Salt River High School. They actually did all the illustrations for the books. We are currently working on our 3rd book. We do fact sheets to distribute to the community and its members. We have brochures that we develop. And then of course our website. So each program has its own page. So this is just a snapshot of the water quality page. We have, of course, a tab, our education tab, which allows people to actually request us for education and outreach activities. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we get our funding. Most of the activities that we do come from grants, a lot of EPA grants. So we have our Clean Water Act 319 base. We have our competitive grants. If we decide to apply for them and are awarded, we've been awarded 5 competitive grants over the past few years. And then we have our Clean Water Act 106 grant. We've also had wetland program development grants over the years. We get funding from BIA, from NRCS, and then of course we have tribal funding to supplement our activities as well. So what does the future look like for us? So of course, it'll be status quo. We will stay on the same path that we've been doing, but we're also going to continue working with SEC to revegetate other parts within the community corridor. We are now seeking treatment in the same manner as a state or TAS for Clean Water Act sections 303 and 401 certification. We're doing this so that the tribe will have more authority over tribal waters. And something really exciting that's happening right now. We are in the midst of working with Odyssey Aquarium on some conservation efforts. So we're looking at doing some cleanups and apple snail mitigation. So there's a picture of apple snails. I'm sure you've seen this. They're they have been invading the Salt River and the Verde River in the last few years. So the picture on the left just shows what the egg masses look like, and then that's an apple snail picture on the right. So we'll be working closely with Odyssey as well as Scottsdale Community College to see if we can try to eradicate these apple snails within tribal boundaries. And that is the end of my presentation. But if you do have any questions from me or for any of the staff, Balthazar or Sarah, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions as well. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you, Gina. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, to please put it in the chat. We have people monitoring the chat, and we'll answer some questions now. Sandy or Linda, you want to start reading some?
Well, I just saw that Gary Beverly had several questions. Gary, do you want to unmute and ask your questions?
Sure. Before my question, I just want to say that the programs that you're doing, Gina, on the river are simply awesome. It's the best environmental maintenance I've ever seen on our river. So thanks to your tribal groups for doing that.
I'm blushing.
No, that was really great. That's an inspiration to the rest of us, what can be done. So I work a lot on the Verde River, and we did some mercury studies on the upper Verde at mile 25. And we looked for both methyl mercury and elemental mercury in non-native fish tissues. We found that the levels of both methyl mercury and elemental mercury were the same. And so decided that the really expensive testing for methyl mercury was not needed. So that's maybe a little factoid you can perhaps use. But I was really concerned with the mercury levels I saw in your fish tissue. They were like 8 to 10 times what we found in the river, up on the upper river at mile 25. You're down at like mile 190, just for others to have perspective here. So I'm just wondering, what were the maximum fish consumption levels you set? And where do you think that mercury is coming from? And all the other toxics in there. You had a lot of, that's a disturbing toxics result that you showed us. Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
I will try. So my mentor, Dr. Yu, he was the one spearheading that effort. So I'm sure he'd be able to really explain it a lot in detail. Do you want me to go back to the consumption report advisory that we put out? There's a slide. Let's see.
Yeah, those were just really high levels, and I was shocked.
Yeah, and I don't remember if Dr. Yu ever actually figured out or had some,
that's good.
Was proposing where it may have been coming from. I think we were tasked by our management, well, they're going to continue eating this fish, so let's put out a consumption advisory of what they should be eating that might be safe enough. But that is a good question. And I think that's something we'd want to answer if we do this study again in the future.
So levels of 3 are, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says that 3 on your scale there is where you would start to see noticeable behavioral changes in the fish. And I was wondering if you noticed any mating or reproduction issues, or just difficulty swimming, just weird behaviors, because these numbers are well over that threshold.
Are you talking about for consumption or?
Well, that, and just how is this affecting, so these are all non-native fish, and but we were concerned about the effects on native fish also. So
Yeah, so what I'm showing right here is what your consumption should be. So like they're saying, for someone with a body weight of 70 kilograms, you shouldn't consume more than 4 channel catfish within the month. And the reason why is because of the methyl mercury.
right. And then go back one slide to the, yes.
Mhm. So yeah, it was a little disturbing. Some of the toxins that we did find, to answer your question that you posed, we didn't observe any odd fish behavior, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't happening. None of us are fish experts.
Right.
But talking to you, I'm glad that you're actually on the line, because this is actually something that we could look at. We've been talking a lot with Scottsdale Community College about different projects we can collaborate on that might be useful. So this could actually be something very useful for the community, and just for the area in general. So this could be something that we try to look at doing in the near future.
Do you think that the chlordane and lindane are washing into the river from upstream agricultural operations?
That's possible. I don't know. So we are downstream of Fort McDowell, and there are lots of other operations, upstream of the community. So I think we really have to do a lot of research to try to answer that question, maybe.
Yeah, because the Fort McDowell people have a big walnut groves, big alfalfa fields. There's chlorpyrifos there too. That's really something that you could look into there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they're applying to their fields. I know what we apply to our fields here, but I'm not privy to that information.
Okay, and then I have just one last question. You were spraying the invasive vegetation with something, and does that have an influence on the riparian environment? How do you handle that?
So when we're looking at spraying, we have to look at something that has been EPA approved to be used within, along the water. So, but we're still very careful. So we make sure that we're not overspraying. We try to just spray directly just on the plant itself, so that we're not getting that material in the water as much as possible. One way that we try to do that, of course, if you look at your herbicides, they're clear. So we'll put a dye in it so that we can tell where our product is going. So.
Okay, great. But thanks, Gina. Great job.
Thanks for the questions.
Thanks, Gary. We also had a couple other questions in the chat about removing invasive species, and you've addressed a lot of that. Is that something that you guys will continue to work on? And also, is tamarisk the same as salt cedar?
Okay, yes and yes. So we're absolutely going to continue those efforts. We're actually in the midst of looking at areas that we want to hit right now, so that we'll start hitting in the warmer months. And yes, salt cedar is tamarisk. That's the same species.
Okay, thanks, Gina. And if people wanted to volunteer to help with some of your efforts, is this something that you reach out to the public for, or is it something you keep in the community?
Both. It depends on the project. The community can be very, how do I say this? They like to keep things to the cup a little bit. So it depends on what project we have and what data might be getting out. So we could possibly have other people from the outside helping with some of these projects. Like mostly for Earth Day, that's probably the biggest way that people can help. But if we do have anybody, if there's anyone that's on the call now that's interested in doing something with us, if you just shoot me an email, then we can see if we can work together.
Great, thanks. And last question was, do you share your water quality data with ADEQ?
Our water quality data is public information. So it goes to the EPA in their water quality database, which is STORET. So if ADEQ wants to pull it down from STORET, they can. They've never come to us and asked for the data. We would have no problem sharing it with them if they wanted it. We do share this information with the community every year. We do an annual assessment report every year that goes out to the community to let them know what our findings are throughout the year.
Okay, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. And I think we're getting close to our hour, so I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Gina, for sharing all that information with us tonight. And I just want to remind everybody that next up in our river series will be Gary Beverly talking about the Verde River. And like I said, this will be recorded. So if anybody's interested in getting the links, they'll be posted. So I can think, oh yeah, go ahead, Gina.
I'm sorry, before you close, Gary, if you could please send me an email, I would appreciate it because I would very much like to have your contact information.
You bet.
Thank
Glad
you.
to do that.
All right, great. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.